Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Stop the Press. I'm Rob Chadwick, and with me are Nick Copson and Bill Martin. Both have a long history of working for local newspapers in the southwest. Today's episode is recorded on December 9th, 2024, and we'll be tackling the role of social media in journalism. So, before we start, how are we all doing?
Yeah, we're good, I think. Yeah.
What have we been up to this week?
Getting ready for Christmas, aren't we? I think making it timely for this time of year. I'm fully all set up, trees up, decks up.
Nice.
I'm just trying to get over the fact that we've now got a theme tune.
That's amazing, isn't it?
I'm trying to get over actually hearing it.
We're getting more and more professional by the week. It's without a doubt. It's amazing. I put on my tree as well, which is a bit of a moment on Facebook. I put my picture on Facebook and got my usual ghastly reactions from people. I try and make my tree as disgusting as possible.
As I remember, you were anti-tree for quite a while, were you not?
Not so much anti-tree, but just kind of, I don't feel like I should make an enormous amount of effort with it. So as a result,
you never do.
The picture is not effort. No. When you get a minute, have a look at my Facebook feed. It's immensely amusing. Anyway, shall we move on and get on with what our first question is for today? So I was going to ask you guys, so on the positive side, what does social media bring to news output that mainstream media possibly hasn't done over the years? Who wants to start us off? Or shall I pick on someone like I do with my students?
Pick.
Bill.
Well, that's a huge question, obviously. But, I mean, social media, I think in the last 12 months, social media has become the most popular method of how people access news now. I mean, that's it's taken over from TV. I think it's been a long time coming, but we're in a world now where people are picking up news from all sorts of sources. So, positively, it means that people are engaging with the news. And social media enables people to access the news when they want it, in the platform they want it, and presumably in the form they want it.
And probably more people that possibly wouldn't have been engaging with the news otherwise.
Yes. Yes, but not necessarily. I don't think it's necessarily increased the numbers of people engaging with news, if you know what I mean. Obviously, if there was no social media, there'd be a lot less people engaged with it. But in terms of social media, it feels like it's taken over the world, doesn't it? But I, think sometimes it's important to remember that not everybody, in fact, I think, less than half the world's population are engaged with social media at all. And certainly in terms of who's actually posting on social media, the numbers come down and down. So positively, you asked me for a positive. I'm a newspaper man, so I'm always going to look at social media with a huge amount of suspicion. But it's the world that we're in. It's got people engaging with news in many formats, when and where they want to. So there's your positive, Nick.
What about you, Nick? What you
want the positives?
Yeah, what you think of the positives?
Well, I think Bill summarised it quite well. I mean, it's to my mind. I mean, it's about speed. It's about accessibility. It's about, you said about engagement. I think that's provided an extra channel. It's no longer, in the traditional news perhaps was very much one way, or majority of it was one way. Now it's back and forth. It's around. Shareability is part of it, which is the nature of social, I guess. So those are the positives. Whether it's
more democratic. Should news be democratic?
Well, it depends on the sources, doesn't it? I mean, it could enable more democratic views and democracy, but it could also be a detrimental side to that as well. So I see it as a positive, but there are, and no doubt your next question is going to head down that road.
Well, my next question was, what are the good social media news sources, do you think? Are there people out there, or sites out there, or organisations out there who are purely doing stuff for social media, which are, that's great. They're proper citizen journalists who are really sort of making a difference. Do you think there are people out there who are doing that? I mean, Bellingcat do that sort of thing. Do we count them as social media journalists? They're probably not, are they? That's more of a website.
Well, I mean, I think you're splitting hairs there a bit, to be honest. I mean, social media. Where do you start with? You know, who's doing it well, who's doing it badly? I mean, it's an enormous thing, isn't it? And you see it in, you know, Elon Musk is telling everyone now that they are the media. Everyone is publishing. I mean, not everyone is publishing, but everyone is able to publish should they choose to. So, I mean, there's all sorts of organisations out there who are publishing on all platforms, and a lot of them are doing it very, very well. You know, a lot of the established brands have now moved into digital publishing and social media publishing. That's brilliant. And if you look at the top 10 sources of news in the UK, there'll be a lot of brands there that you recognise. You know, from the established brands in the UK media market. I think there are different forces at play in social media, though, aren't they? Which I don't think, you know, you two might, but I certainly don't. You know, the sort of complexities of the algorithms that enable social media to feed you news that it thinks you will engage with.
Yeah.
The danger of that means that you might only ever be seeing news that it's almost like being in an echo chamber, isn't it?
Kind of reinforces your opinion, basically. Yeah.
And we'll all see it in our own feeds all the time.
Yeah.
Which is why it's possibly not a good thing in terms of democracy. It just kind of, if you've got a view or you're influenced by a view and that lights a candle with you, then you are all more than likely to be encountering more and more content, wherever it's from, that you know fulfills
your
that
mindset.
desire, that you know, that engagement. So you know, you're right, Spot. It is an echo chamber, and unless it's policed and managed properly, or you don't go beyond the pale and look beyond that, then you could end up, you know, down a rabbit hole of very secular not secular, you know, distinct views and so on, which is not healthy, I don't think so.
And you end up at that point with division in society and basically a bunch of people who are adamant they know best, which is totally the polar opposite opinion to another bunch of people who are adamant they know best. Yeah. And we end up with the riots that happened in around the country in August this year.
So that's quite interesting. So you said about division there, didn't you? I mean, I think division in society has probably always existed, but I think social media has probably made it a lot worse, mainly because you're suddenly exposed to the kind of views and opinions that you wouldn't normally have encountered. I remember when when the Brexit vote occurred in, was it 2016? Was it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you know, and I won't go into the debate now on this podcast about which way we all voted, but it went one way. We know which way it went, and I was suddenly flooded with all these opinions of my friends, right, on Facebook. The kind of views that I would not normally have encountered. And I like these people, but I didn't like their views and opinions, right? And that, for a period of time...
Are you prepared to kind of just say what sort of views and opinions, just to give a bit of context to that?
Well, I voted for Brexit, okay? And the views and opinions of a lot of my friends, or people I knew, were how this was the most ghastly decision ever.
End of the world.
Yeah, it was the end of the world, correct. And the views and opinions were so strong, quite ugly in many ways.
Yeah. I thought the same.
For a period of time, and probably a few years, I looked at those people differently.
Yeah, it's like...
But I would never have encountered that opinion if it wasn't for social media.
I feel exactly the same way, yeah. It's like... the point of a democracy is that anything could... You know, if you put something out to a vote, then either of those things can happen, or three of those things, or whatever could happen. And that you really should just accept the decision of the majority once that's happened. And 1 million people wandering around the streets of London makes no difference to that, does it? It's still 17.5 million people voted for it. Until you've got 18 million people wandering around London, makes no difference. Accept the decision, move on. That's what democracy is, isn't it? At least to a degree.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, that's one of the things that social media has enabled minority interests, or, you know, it's quite easy to believe now, isn't it, that what I would consider minority issues have become the biggest thing in the UK at this particular time.
Yeah.
Because people with a certain point of view and people with a certain take on a particular issue will keep hammering away with these very extreme views or different types of content, that sort of stuff, which then drive certain levels of engagement, which then feeds the algorithm, which means that you get this sort of cycle of noise around a particular issue.
And all the time, Russia and China are adding to that noise in order to drive that division so that they can profit from it.
Well, so we're led to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, leads me to the next question, which is, do we think it's a good idea that people can discuss news online? So when we're talking about social media, I think there's a case to talk about news stories on websites of mainstream media and the ability of people to comment on those news stories underneath and the division that comes out of those comments underneath that. Do we think that's, I can see why discussion's a good thing, but what I see on those sites and what I see on social media sites isn't discussion, it's abuse and vitriol. What do we think that's do we think that in the long run that's a good thing for democracy, or is that a thing that's destroying democracy almost?
I remember when we first started having website comments on some of the old newspaper websites that I used to be in charge of, and this was in the the very early days of the early 2000s, mid 2000s, even when we were very new to it, and so was the population. But it very quickly became clear that online commenting, in my view anyway, was a very clear view of the dark soul of human opinion, actually.
And that was really early on, was it?
It was really early on, and I don't think that's got any better. And I would have thought, for my first 10 years of running news websites, the one theme that dominated our discussions with the public and establishments like the police or local councils and local politicians and that sort of thing was, why can't you monitor the comments? How can you allow people to put things like this on your website, etc., etc.? And it was a difficult question to answer at the time because we hadn't been used to that. We used to have a letters page in the paper, and the letters would come into the editor, and I'd sit there and you'd read them all, and you'd think, I'm not publishing that, and I might publish that.
Yeah, and most of it probably wasn't publishable, I'd imagine.
Well, who knows? Can't remember, but. Suddenly that control had gone out the window, and social media brought that, and you can still see it now. If you let's name check the mighty Daily Mail, Mail Online, and that sort of thing. The comments that people write on stories, are
fruity.
Yes, sometimes shocking.
Yeah.
And you realise, that some people out there are very angry. Some people are very cruel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, it feels to me like that is the massive downside of social media news and being able to comment on social media news is that it's not become so much news as a discussion. So something will happen and that will happen and be reported. But for days and weeks afterwards, it then becomes something that will drive division in society. And nowadays, nothing can happen without someone questioning whether it actually happened and things like that. I remember that boat driving into the Baltimore Bridge recently, and I just happened to stumble onto something on Twitter on it, and it was like someone was just saying that it was completely made up, that it was just false footage, completely made up, that it was the CIA with a plot for blah, 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 whatever it was. I can't even remember what it was.
Like the moon landings.
It was so insane. But everything's like the moon landings now. No one believes anything, do they? And is that the thing that's being driven by social media? Nick, what do you think?
By social...
Conspiracy theories, are they being driven by the ability of social media to take itself seriously?
Well, I don't know about so much social media. I mean, I think a conspiracy theory exists because of a lack of trust in either the authority behind it or the voice behind it. I think it's just about lack of trust. But obviously, with so much fake news around the place and the potential for artificially altering what you read and what you see and hear, then it could fuel more lack of trust, no doubt about it. And if that leads to a conspiracy, then so be it. But I think conspiracies have always been around. It's about lack of trust.
Well, they have always been around. I was reading a book recently about something emanating from Norwich in 1152 or something, and it was basically the blood libel conspiracy theory started out then because someone was trying to stay in their post and they'd come up with this theory and stuff, and yeah, it was a really good book, but yeah, they've been around forever and ever and ever.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. I mean, social media has definitely has provided the technology and the platform for those conspiracies to be articulated, to be shared, to be, you can content to be created that almost justifies them or makes them seem real.
Yeah, it feels like it is much easier to spread that stuff now than it ever was before.
Yeah, get a following and a behind the concept of a conspiracy.
Yeah, when Kate Middleton, before we knew that she had cancer, there was a guy in Italy who had 2.3 million TikTok followers who was making up all sorts of stuff. And then when they challenged him on it, when it all came out, he said, "Well, could have been true." He's like, "Well, that's not news, is it? It could have been true. Anything could be true, isn't it?"
Yeah, and there's a lot of that content out there now, isn't there? If you can see some pretty convincing pictures of the Loch Ness Monster now. If you really,
well, that's not a conspiracy theory, Bill. That's absolute fact.
It's funny that the Loch Ness Monster theories probably exist because of a lack of social media and because of a lack of picture quality and image quality and all that sort of stuff. All the stuff that we didn't have back in those days.
But now we've got Photoshop.
Now it'd be debunked within seconds.
Well, it's a bit like the Beast of Bodmin, or the Beast of Dartmoor or whatever. I'm convinced, and that if a conspiracy, that legend has dominated my entire media career in the Southwest. It crops up every summer. Someone has seen it, and thing. But I've never once seen a picture that convinces me there's a big cat out there, ever.
I've seen plenty of pictures of cats very near to the camera, with a lot of stuff further away.
Yeah, and big footprints and that thing. So, I'm sure social media can prove me wrong, but, I'm pretty sure there's no Beast of Bodmin.
Yeah.
No, I'm pretty sure as well. So coming back to social media, so can it be a force for good? Can social media as a news outlet be something which can be reined in now, or is it too late? Are we at a point where actually there's nothing that can be done about it short of shutting the whole thing down?
It can be a force for good. The problem is it's almost unregulated and unpoliced. The bottom line is it's a platform. It's not a news provision. It's a platform, a bit like the internet or the World Wide Web, should we say? Do we still use that phrase? I don't know.
You do, Nick.
Yeah, the radio, this podcast. These are all platforms and channels that enable somebody with information or a voice or an opinion to publish. That's all it is. So if the BBC are publishing on social media, then maybe it's a force for good. If the Guardian are or the Sunday Times are, it's a force for good. If some random blogger somewhere with a conspiracy theory to propagate through his following and creating an echo chamber around that sort of stuff, then maybe it's not. But again, it's I don't know how you can police that and
well, it's down to the responsibility of the publisher, isn't it? And as you say, social media in itself is a brilliant thing and a definite force for good, isn't it? In that, I think both my children get their news from TikTok. Now, is that a problem? I don't see what it is. It depends what news they're getting.
Correct.
And that's largely up to them, isn't it? To police their feed and the platform that they're using will feed them.
So is it down to education, educating people to understand that what they're getting through those sites is something they still need to question? Whereas in the old days, we probably didn't question news that much. We probably watched the BBC News and we read the newspaper and we didn't question it to a massive degree.
Well, it was considerably more filtered. Like the letters page I've always referred to. News was very carefully thought about and edited. I'm not saying that it isn't now on many platforms, but but it definitely was regulated, and it definitely was in the power of an editor or a sub-editor to say, no, we're not going to run that.
Yeah.
We haven't corroborated it. Or that's the thing. I'm sure that still happens.
And ultimately,
in many cases.
all media is mediated. Everything is edited down at some point or other, and you're getting a story that the editor has decided to tell you, and the producer and the director has decided to tell you.
But not necessarily in social media, because anybody can publish. You can do a XXX live from wherever you are, can't you? And so,
but even then, they're pointing the camera at or telling you the things that they want you to, that their interpretation of that event. So it's still a mediated feed, isn't it? Even then.
Yeah, I guess so.
It's tricky, Nick, because I hate to get to this point, but I think what you're talking about is that at some point, it might be us as well, not right at the moment, but it might be us or our next generations that have to essentially verify and fact check everything they see. And how do you do that? There are tools that you can fact check things, I guess, aren't there? But you've almost got to have a little computer in your head going, okay, what have I just looked at or listened to? Okay, it was interesting. Do I take that as read, or do I check where it's come from? Who's the journo behind it? Who's the blogger? What else have they written about? All these little calculations go in your head to go, can I trust this? Or should I go and check it out somewhere else? Can I go on Google and search for that somewhere else? Is somebody else corroborating it by publishing similar stories? I mean, you do all that yourself probably, don't you? I don't know, subliminally. But maybe we're going to get to that point.
I think, and I probably would say this as a teacher, but teaching media literacy to young people would not be a bad idea. Being able to kind of take messages and sort of decode them and decide how they're going to decode their news and how they're going to decode their media, without just believing stuff that just reinforces whatever opinion they might have had when they were 13, 14, 15, which seems to be the case a lot of the time.
It's hard for them, isn't it? I mean, it's interesting. You've seen with the rise of news influencers as well, haven't you? So you got Joe Rogan in the States, you got Piers Morgan here, Robert Peston, I think, is one now. Nigel Farage is probably one.
Yeah,
his own TV. So, you've got very powerful people now who will be publishing news of a sense, or news content, or news-based content. So there's a lot of content out there for your students now, isn't there? But that sort of editing of it is difficult for them now, isn't it?
You're right, and you're right. We're going to get to the point where let's say a news influencer or a blogger or a vlogger or whatever you want to call these people, do they become more powerful, I guess, than a news, organisation in the traditional sense? It's possible in the future, but then they're still trading. Their currency should still be trust.
Yeah,
if they've got 200 million followers on Instagram or TikTok, that should be there because those 200 million people trust what they say. They like what they say, right? They absolutely like what they say, but they should also trust what they say. So if somebody's spouting spurious propaganda, eventually those people will probably get found out, and that following will decline, I suspect. So what I'm saying is I still think the same currencies exist. It's about quality, trustworthy content.
But in a world where the MSM is not trusted by a lot of people nowadays, and certainly a lot of people wouldn't trust social media as far as they could throw it, then we are in a difficult position. Maybe those people, maybe those trusted news organisations now are not so much the news gatherers, but the people who verify the news. Organisations such as Bellingcat, BBC verified to a degree, although I'm not 100% convinced of BBC Verify as a verification process. But maybe that's the way that news organisations will go. That everything will be published, and then you'll have verification organisations. But then how do we stop verification organisations becoming biased as well? It is basically a minefield, isn't it?
Oh, we're in a situation, aren't we, when the man who's about to become the most powerful man in the Western world, if not the world, for the second time, has worked out that he can basically say what he likes. and he will, on certain platforms at certain times, he will say things that are clearly not based on fact in order to get a reaction, and he just moves on.
Yep.
So we've said it before, haven't we? It's the Wild West now in terms of separating fact from fiction. Who's publishing this? Who's publishing that? I mean, if you look at the any of the AI images or AI created news stories and that sort of thing, I mean, they are pretty convincing.
Yeah. I mean, they're amazing. Yeah, without a doubt, they are very, very good. So it is. We've strayed a little bit from social media to a degree, but actually, it's much the same stuff. And I think it's kind of, how do you stop conspiracy theories being seen as facts? And
I mean, Trump's a great example of social media in its most dangerous form or most difficult to handle form. So he was kicked off Twitter, was he? So what did he do? Started his own.
Amazing. Truth Social.
Truth Social.
That means it's true because he's called Truth, so it must be true, mustn't it?
If there's any, I don't know, what generation are we talking about here? Generation X? No, that's us, isn't it? Generation. Come on, help me out here, guys. Z, they'll do.
Z.
Right? If there's any Generation Z listeners right now, I would recommend on your social media channels, be it TikTok or whatever you use. The Gen Z don't use Facebook, do they? No, it's TikTok. Go on TikTok and follow. I'd recommend you follow left-wing and right-wing media. You'd follow traditional media and non-traditional media just to get a broad, diversified kind of opinion and a feed coming through. And from that, you can start forming your own own opinions, right? But if you just go down one route, I suspect we'll end up in, like you say, echo chambers and very, very, very diverse kind of opinions across society.
We're into Generation Alpha now.
Generation Alpha. Okay, Generation Alpha. Well, presumably that's like, what, 12 years old, is it? I suspect they're not looking at any news at all. But
2010 to 24. Those born in that period.
So they'll be looking at Newsround.
Yeah. No.
Those were the days.
No,
Those
they
were
won't.
the days.
John Craven, now that is a man who could be trusted.
We hope.
Well, probably. I certainly hope so, yeah. I mean, no, let's not go down that road. Talking of that road, our next episode is going to be about what's been going on at the BBC over the last 6 months or so. Have we got anything to add to the social media thing just to wrap things up before we finish? I'll take that as a no. Okay, so I think we are done. Thank you for listening, everybody. We will be back in a bit with our exploration of what's been going on with Greg Wallace, Russell Brand, Hugh Edwards, etc., etc.